Goedenamiddag iedereen. It's with great pleasure. It's for me an honor to introduce Thomas Prehn, who is the director of Mindlab in Denmark. And I asked his permission to do this introduction in Dutch. Want de switch naar het Engels is niet evident vandaag voor mijn brein, moet ik zeggen. Toen wij deze dag begonnen te organiseren, daarover begonnen na te denken, kwam vrij snel op de tafel, we moeten iemand hebben vanuit Mindlab in Denemarken. En uiteindelijk is die iemand Thomas Prehn geworden, die directeur is van Mindlab sinds een aantal maanden. En Mindlab is een organisatie die transversaal werkt binnen de Deense overheid. Dus in Mindlab zijn verschillende ministeries verenigd. En zij werken nieuwe oplossingen uit voor de maatschappij. En betrekken daar vooral burgers en bedrijven bij ook. Dus zij brengen als het ware het perspectief van de burger binnen. En zijn echt een platform voor co-creatie. Naast advies, ondersteuning, begeleiding, opleiding bieden zij ook gewoon fysieke ruimte aan waar de verschillende partijen elkaar kunnen ontmoeten en wat functioneert als een soort neutrale ruimte waar creativiteit echt vrij spel kan krijgen. Wat mij boeit ook aan Mindlab is het feit dat zij in hun team mensen samenbrengen en laten samenwerken met heel verschillende achtergronden. Je vindt daar politicologen, filosofen, antropologen. Dus het zijn mensen met zeer diverse achtergronden die daar samen aan projecten werkten. Een van de projecten die je onder andere op hun website vindt, is dat zij bijvoorbeeld verschillende ministeries hebben samengebracht om startende bedrijven makkelijker tot de informatie te brengen die ze nodig hebben. Ze hebben ook een dialoog gefaciliteerd, onder andere tussen de voedselindustrie en de overheid. Dus zij werken echt op heel concrete projecten op het terrein. Ik denk dat zij daar ook al heel mooie resultaten hebben neergezet. But I leave it to you, Thomas, to explain more in detail what Mindlab is about and which results you have achieved. And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot of your explanation. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Can everyone hear me? It's good? Yeah? All right, perfect. I'm not sure about giving more details of what you said in Dutch, because I didn't really recognize what you said. I think you said something about ministries. So just to make that clear, we are a cross-governmental innovation unit. We work for the Ministry of Business and Growth. We work for the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Employment, and then we also have a municipality called Odense, which is the third largest city in Denmark, which is a fairly small city. Should I take this one off, or all good?
There's a problem with this mic, I think.
Otherwise I can just shout. Will this work? Oh, it's for the... So I need to do something that works. Excuse me. No worries. There goes the Madonna look. Now? Yes. That's innovation right there for you. let me just say a little bit about Mindlab. We do design process. We do a lot of ethnographic research. Then we work with design processes and innovation processes in order to create services, insight, new regulations, stuff like that. I think I'm invited here today, though, to talk about how you build a capacity of innovation within your organizations. And when I say capacity building, normally people will reckon that this will be something about training and implementing process, building an innovation model that you can put in a book. But since I started at Mindlab, and I started 7 or 8 months ago, when we think about capacity building, we think of culture as like a behavioral practice and leadership, because it is within these two that you can actually scale the culture of innovation. It's not through projects or through processes. So that's why our focus, at least when we talk about capacity building, we talk about leadership and cultural practice. And I will share today what I think cultural practice is. And I will also share with you something about leadership within an innovative organization. So I hope that will do. I think I have just a little less than an hour, and I'll, if you're lucky, save some time for questions. But if you have questions along the way, raise your hand. Someone will probably run to you with a mic, or you'll just have to shout out your question, and I'll repeat it. Two things going on here. What? As you probably reckon by now, I'm not a tech guy. So I think that we're all familiar with the term innovation. However, this is what I call the dilemma of process, or maybe even the secret of innovation. And you have to read it like this. This is why I wanted the Madonna setup. So this is the impact, and this is time. And the one starting from the bottom, ending at the top, is knowledge. So it's like a learning curve. The other one is the impact of the decisions that you actually make. So I know that you can close down a project at the end, but it's rather about how will the decisions that you make have an impact or an influence on the actual final product or service or regulations. So this is the dilemma of process. You reckon that you have, like, even though you're smart guys, when you start off, you will get smarter along the way? You reckon that one? You agree? Silently? And the other one is that, you know, there's from when you crawl up a tree, you go up, you have two, you can go to the left, you can go to the right. You pick the one to the right, and you leave everything on the left behind. So that's the way that you work with decisions as well. So the first decisions you make, you have the whole playing field for yourself. Along the way, through a whole lot of decisions, you end up having very small room for improvement left. You can always choose whether the button should be red or blue, but you cannot change the fact that it's a button. Okay? Does this seem familiar? Normally I would draw something. That's impossible now. So this is the dilemma of process. So in order to rethink this, still the same question is, how do we work with the knowledge, the learning curve, and how do we decide what to decide at what point? And under normal circumstances, I would probably do a drawing now or ask you for something. I'll just explain it to you. See, the reason why the learning curve acts like this is because it's a very passive approach to learning. So we start off our project. We actually believe that we already know a whole lot about this project, or maybe even the citizens involved. So, hang on, another tech problem. There you go. So we start off passively with the learning that we already have. And then we start making decisions. Sorry about that one. Start making decisions. And along the way, we'll learn something, because the decisions that we make will come to become new learnings for us, because we stumble upon problems. So we have to learn something. Then we open a book, do a Google desk research, maybe even talk to a colleague, maybe even ask an organization outside our own organization, but someone very similar to ourselves. Or maybe even ask someone else. But the learning curve is now growing. But the problem is that you make all the big impact decisions still on the small learning, on the least knowledge, the least insight that you could possibly have within the project. So what you have to do is that you actually have to be more proactive in the way that you approach your learning. And this is something that we do in Mindlab. So we would never do a scope or effect scoping before we actually do some research. So always research first. So actively, proactively go into research mode. So that's the way that you fix the research, the learning curve. How do you think you would actually be able to fix the decision problem? Does anyone have a guess, or how would you fix the problem? Because even though you're proactively learning, and this one goes up, you still have the first decision to make on a very little insight. Yeah?
By including faster in your project people whom will have an impact on the project.
Oh, so you will include people within the group for decision making. That creates ownership, and that's a perfect way to work. That's one of the benefits of process, is that if you invite people into your process, that will create ownership, and in that way your project would already, have implemented. But still, we need to work the thing about how do we actually work with the decision problem that we take decisions on a very little insight. You're drawing with your fingers?
Later in the curve.
Yes. You just wait with decisions. How does that feel? Strange? Because normally, just as people, we like to make decisions, right? It doesn't matter if it's privately or within our businesses. And mostly, and most organizations as well, they see a coherence between progress and decision. So no decisions, no progress. Thank you. I just do it. Quick. That doesn't work. That's the learning curve. And then you actually await with your decision making in order to do decisions. This is like, in theory at least. But this is what really comes in as a problem within most organizations. Because as I just said, decision equals process or progress. So when you don't do any decisions, you don't have any progress. So when you come to your boss and said, I haven't really made any decisions yet. It's quite an open space there for me, but I've learned a lot. Your boss will probably send you back into the office and ask you to make decisions, and also write it down on a paper, right, on a specific note that you probably have. So that's actually one of the problems with innovation. Do you really have that playing field where you can research your way without making decisions and become much more wiser before you make any decisions? So that's the way that we work with process. This is the way that we work with process. I might bring this along. So how do you actually work with decision making, the lack of decision making, and still have progress? Do experiments. Do projects on napkins. Implement small bits and pieces of the future that you desire. From every little learning that you get, do a small project where you implement it. Not to see if it's a final product, just to see if it has some functionality, if it's in the right direction that you really want to go. So working with experiments or prototypes, tests, whatever you would call it, is something that we do as well. Because this is a way to have progress while still learning. Because every time that you learn something and you put it into a project or a prototype or a test, you will learn some more. So it's not about saying that you should do prototyping in order to get to the final product. It's about prototyping in order to learn even more. And that way you learn and you have progress. I'll put it in my pocket. Sorry. Jesus. Sorry about that one. This is actually brand new. I think it's 3 days old. It might be the new model of Mindlab. For now, we call it an exploration model. It's not an innovation model. It's a model for exploration, because exploration is really the core business of Mindlab. Some might say research, but we add the testing, the prototyping, and that we call exploration. And this is the model of exploration, where we have put the experiment in the heart of our innovation. Because I feel that even though it's only 7 or 8 months I've worked with Mindlab, I had 7 years of experience as innovation consultant within big companies. And before that, 5 years in Danish Broadcast Corporation, which is a kind of political organization. So I know for a fact that these organizations, even the private ones, they have a very hard time bringing experimentation into the core business of what they do. So having the experiment in the heart of your innovation, I think, is something that's very needed within public organizations. For one reason, at least, is that it's very difficult for us to foresee what will happen outside of the public sector organizations. You have new technology, you have citizens that behave oddly or strange or doesn't do what you want them to do. So when you implement stuff, they don't really see it as something that they ought to do, and they do it something completely different. So experimenting your way into implementation, I think that's very important. And how we work is that we work constantly between product development or service development, regulation development, and implementation. So where we see that we play a very big role is in between the development part and the implementation part. And as you probably all know, innovation is not creativity, it's not a product, it's something that's implemented with a value creation. So it has to be of value before you can actually call it innovation. So implementation is a very important part of innovation. So what the intention, as we call it in Mindlab, we call it the political intention, has to be implemented in a way that it actually creates the value that we intended it for. And that means the citizens themselves, they need to embrace what you come up with. But also the organization have to, if it's some kind, let's say, a new digital product, and I dare to say this here because we're in Belgium. In Denmark, we have a lot of problems with digital problems at the moment. So I wouldn't say that in Denmark, but let's say a digital project. So when you implement that, in order for you to make that economic or financial benefits as a public sector organization, the citizens has to embrace the things that you do. So innovation actually starts up with the citizens. Okay. The great thing about putting the experiment in the heart of your innovation, so it always starts with an experience. You see something, you learn something, and then you explore it in order to get wiser, and then you put it into an experiment in order to test your hypothesis. Then you extract whatever you learn, and then you empower it in a new experiment in order to learn something new, something that you can experience again.
And this way it goes all the way around and round and round. And actually the experiment at some point might be a regulation or a new law or something. But even the oldest law that we have in Denmark is 150 years old, and we change it not every year, but we change it. So everything we do will always be an experiment. It's something that changes. So that's why you have to put experiment in rather than just implementation. Actually, one of my favorites about experimentation is the MVPs. It's called, and I actually saw you had the How Google Works book out there. Did anyone read it? Not today, but at some point. There's also a book called Lean Innovation. Lean Startup, I think it's called. Sorry about that one. Lean Startup. And they talk about the MVPs, the minimum viable product. One of the issues about public innovation is that we always want to build the biggest possible perfect solution. And minimum viable product is the smallest perfect solution. So that's just a little bit of what you actually want to do, but it's so easy. It's so small that you can build it in maybe even weeks, and you can implement it just to see if you're on the right track. So putting experiment into the heart of your innovation also help you to build MVPs, and as long as it's experiments, it's impossible to make mistakes as well, right? So no talk about failure or zero failure politics and stuff like that. Just look at the time. All right. Another benefit of exploration and putting experimentation into the heart of innovation is that sometimes, and if you've tried this yourself, don't raise your hand, just mentally think what went wrong. Sometimes we create the perfect solution for the wrong problem. It's so perfect, the solution, but the problem that we fixed wasn't the right one. So why is that? I think it's because what we see, it's like when you go to the doctor, you have a symptom of something. Your back might ache, and he will cure the back. But then the back aches again. And you go back to the doctor, and then he finds out it wasn't really the back, it was because of your knee. So he had to cure the knee in the first place. So what we see when we work with innovation, at least what some of the politicians see, and what we'll see if we don't really scrape into the dirt to research what's really the problem behind the symptom. It's only the symptom as an observation. And I reckon that you guys are probably like we are in the Danish organization, public sector organization. We really want to get things done, right? So we jump into execution, right? Do you recognize that from yourselves? So the problem is, if you're executing on a symptom, you're creating the perfect solution for the wrong problem. So what really is necessary, and this is why exploration is such a big part of what we do, is that you actually have to look for the right problem. What is the right problem? And the right problem also has an opportunity. So finding that right problem or the right opportunity is so important. Don't skip all this and go to execution. Actually, most organizations skip the problem solving as well. They just go to execute. So the problem solving is perhaps some of the part of the process that you know from yourselves. But don't try and fix the wrong problem. Really go into the deep with those symptoms that you find. Use exploration in order to see those. And I heard you said something about that we have sociologists and anthropologists and stuff like that. So we have all kinds of social research people who does a lot of ethnographic research in order to really know this problem. So they will sit with citizens for a week just to explore how does a single service work with them. At the moment we work at something called Arbejdsskadestyrelsen, which is a place where if you get injured during work, you can get healthcare benefits for the period while you're ill and can't do work. So how does that work? So we do customer service journeys. we will sit down with a recipient of a very strange letter that they actually get from this office and read it with them in order to learn what is the real nature of the problem that we experience. Is it the wording in the letter? Is it the header of the letter? Is it the letter altogether? Is it that they didn't get the money in time and stuff like that? And actually, the funny thing we learned is that they kept on writing to them because they wanted to be transparent. So you had this very difficult, complex, and very long process. And we chose as a strategy, not we as Mindlab, but the Ministry of Employment chose as a strategy to be transparent, for you always to know where is your case at this very moment. And that just made it so difficult. They thought, as long as you leave me alone, things are on the right track. And when you get back to me, it's either because I get my money, or I won't get my money, or at least I have to do something. So writing a very complex civil servant kind of rhetorics letter constantly just to inform them that everything is going well. That was, at least the wish was transparency, but it wasn't. So really sitting down and not change the wording of the letter, but just change the process altogether was something that we learned by sitting with them. The X in exploration. One of the difficulties about actually doing exploration, because we can talk about it all day, and as leaders you can say, let's do more of these research kind of stuff that Thomas talked about. But there's an issue about exploration, and that has to do with perspective. How do we look at things? And the funny thing is that even though you're a social researcher, so you by education is good at looking at new things and learning from new things, we still have the same issues. And the thing is that perspective is almost always based on experience, meaning that when we look at stuff, the way that we look at it is based on experience, something that we did before. And we would be very likely to solve a problem we've seen before the same way that we did it last time. And that might be right, but it also might be wrong. Or at least in Denmark, we have this saying at the moment at the public sector is more for less. We don't have the same kind of money we had a few years back. So we have to do not the same for less, but we actually have to do more for less. Because the need is growing. The need for welfare and stuff like that is growing. So we need to do more for less. And in this way, the way that you solve the problem last time won't work this time, for sure. But the problem is that you will look at the problem with that perspective. And actually I came up with three, what would you call it, three things that will affect your ability to change your perspective. But that's really what you need in order to do real innovation. You need to change the perspective of how you look at the problems and also how you look at the solution. And one of them is habits. We tend to do stuff the way we normally do it. That's fairly easy. The other one is presumptions. And that's a little bit more quirky, because that has to do with the way that we perceive ourselves. That we actually think that we know kind of everything, at least within the area that we work in. So because we have that notion, we wouldn't dare to ask someone else. We wouldn't ask someone else. Maybe just a little bit of a research, desk research, for sure. But that's it. So you won't change your perspective in that regard as well. And the third one, that's the most quirky one of all. It's vanity. It's because we are all vain and we hate to be stupid or to look stupid or say something stupid, even ask a stupid question amongst our colleagues. So rather pretend to know what's right than say, I don't know. Should we ask someone? And the funny thing is, organizations like this, we are all paid as knowledge workers. So knowledge is the key. This is how we get raises. This is how we get titles. This is how we get manager titles, or director titles. It's because we know stuff. Nobody wants to be the guy who doesn't know anything. So vanity is really the killer of perspective. So vanity is also the killer of innovation, because you're not able to change your perspective. Could you please help me out? Please stand up. Could you please turn the chair, the green one?
Bring it to you?
No, just turn it, please.
Like this?
Perfect, thank you. Do you want to sit down?
Like this?
Oh, that's very creative. It might be creative, but also it could have to do with something with vanity, that you don't want to sit and look at all the people, but you can turn the chair again if you like. Thank you. And please turn the chair.
Turn the chair.
Turn the chair.
Again.
Yes, please. And I can ask you 100 times to turn the chair, and you will never turn the chair upside down.
I know.
Why is that?
I have to.
I made a little note there for you. But nobody never sits on the first row. I should have learned that a long time ago, so I should have put it in the back. You can take the note. But the thing is, a chair like this is designed to be standing like this, right? So that's the perspective of the chair. So no matter how many times I ask you to turn the chair, you constantly turn it around. Nobody, and I really mean nobody, has ever turned it upside down. That's how inflicted you are by your perspective. So bring the chair example to work and look at how you solve the problems you do when you work. And I'm sure most of them are chairs just like this. And you will solve them like this, and you will never turn the chair upside down. So just a little bit of an exercise in order for you to remember at least some of the things I said. Also, just without the chair thing, one of the things why perspective doesn't really work in organizations, this is all about people, the individual, the three first things. But when it comes to organizations, the lack of generosity is really the problem for perspective. We are kind of reluctant to share what we know. True? You can say yes on behalf of your colleagues, and I'll know that you share always. But we lack generosity, and that ties into the whole thing I said before about knowledge workers. That is the currency of the modern worker in organizations like this, is knowledge. So we rather keep it to ourselves than share it. And this is why the perspective as an organization altogether won't change at all. All right, that's a bit of a downer. Wait. So what is the easiest way to create new perspectives? It's bring in diversity. Hire strange people. Recruit strange people for your projects. Don't ask the guy next to you. Take a walk on the street. Ask a guy outside. Or a lady. Do partnerships. Don't do anything by yourselves. Always do partnerships. The funny thing about partnerships, though, is that collaboration or partnerships comes in like two ways. Cooperation and collaboration. cooperations is when you, in the old days, had like grocery stores. You know, they joined forces. They bought milk. You know, they could buy a lot of milk together, get a lower price, and then they went back, different goals, you know, same effort, same benefit. But when they got back to the store, it's a different goal. You know, I had to, you know, I'll lower my price 3 for 1 in order to kill my neighbor grocery store. So I'll get all the customers. So that's cooperation. The thing about cooperation that people very at least what people like the most about cooperation is the thing about it's the effort and the benefit are the same. So I'll have to do as much an effort as you do, but we get the same discount. So the benefit and the effort is the same. Collaboration is a bit different. See, what ties collaboration is not the economic benefits of buying milk together. It's a shared common goal. So when you do partnerships, you would probably look for someone who shares the goals that you have. You have a shared common goal. But now the thing about cooperation starts to fool us because we think that we should have an equal spread on effort. So if it's a 50-50 partnership, you should do 50% of the work and I'll do 50% of the work. And whatever benefit comes out, we'll share in half. But that's not how partnerships works. They're true collaborations. And true collaborations, the effort is not common or similar or equal. It's unfair. You know, you have to, someone maybe even have to put in 80% and the other one would just put in 20%. And when it comes to share the benefits, it's almost the other way around. So I'll do 80%, I only get 20%. That's how collaborations work, because it's the common goal that are the starting point. But the thing is that when you do collaborations, the benefit that you get yourselves, it's bigger than if you did it by yourself. So even though you have to put in a whole lot more effort within the realm of the partnership, the benefit that you get individually is bigger than you could produce by yourself. So when you do partnerships, just remember, it's not a cooperation. It's not a fair deal. It's an unfair deal when you do collaborations and partnerships. But what you can achieve will be much more than you can achieve by your own. And there we have it again, the generosity part of it. You probably not be able to read it, so I'll just read it aloud. It says, it's amazing how much you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And that's really something that we can learn within organizations. We have a structural boundary called KPIs, Key Performance Indicators. Normally that will be in silos. So you have like one KPI for the entire organization, and then you'll just disseminate it through the organization, but in silos. So one department has to deal with this kind, and the other one has to deal with this kind. So when I ring this guy up and say, could you please help me out on this project? He'll go, no way, man. That's not my KPI. So generosity within the organization is really something that you should facilitate as managers or leaders. But you should also just give away. You know, somebody has to start giving stuff away. And I'm sure that if one starts, the other will follow. Because then the currency of the organization will not be knowledge, but the fact that you actually share knowledge. So the people facilitate or participating in sharing would be the winners of the new organization. And I promise you guys some time for questions, so I have to speed up a little bit. It's a very complex one, this one. It's actually, this is how I see leadership. Funny enough. It's not that crazy as it looks. To me, leadership is about framing and making space. So you have to frame the project, the vision, the budget, the effect that you really want, the people participating in it. And then you have to leave them alone. Then you have to make room for them to excel what they do best. So you're a facilitator of framing and making room. That's your job. It's actually kind of easy once you get it. The framing part is the difficult one. But the other one is fairly easy, unless you're a very in-depth, detailed manager. Then it's fairly difficult. I'm thinking about writing a book called The Lazy Leader, because I think that will work, actually, because you will not interfere with your employees. It's still just on the drawing board. Since I'm a lazy leader, probably won't be anything either. This is actually an example on how we disseminate the culture that we like. It's also an example on the thing I showed just before about framing and making room. See, I wanted, actually my ambition working at Mindlab is changing the overall culture of public sector. I think it can be more agile. I think it can be more explorative. It can be more experimenting. It can do minimal viable products. It can maybe implement stuff without writing small notes that go all the way up to the permanent secretary and back down with red notes in it. So to me, that's the idea of working in Mindlab. So as I just said in the beginning, capacity building to me is not about training the trainers. It's about implementing or disseminating a new way of thinking and a new way of behavior, a new way of actions. And I started a project called Project X. And I had 3 of my craziest people. And the only thing I said to them is, I would like for you guys to do experiences or interventions that will push for a new culture within our partner organizations. And then I left them alone. At some point, though, they asked me, what is the budget? And I just made sure it was very high. And then they came up with a very little budget project. Fair enough. And this is actually it. There's something that we just ran last week. We did a beta test within Mindlab, fair to say. And what they did, they wrote out to all the employees in Mindlab, what kind of behavior would you like to see more of? And the thing about culture is that culture is very difficult. What is culture anyway? But actions is very easy. So what kind of behavior, what kind of actions would you love to see more of amongst your colleagues? And then everyone pitched in, and they did this very long list. It's mostly in Danish. Frequent flyer, it says change your seating spot. Social luncher. Actually have dinner with some of the other guys that we work with, not one from Mindlab. Overperformer. Do whatever you can for one small detail in the project. Stuff like that. So it's really actions or behavior within the culture. And we put it up, and they made this kind of a game where you get these small coins with the number on and the headline on, and then you had to do it, and then you would get a sticker mark. That's 1 point. And at the end of the week, we evaluated. The winner and the loser got one of those fish pedicure kind of thing. Do you know those? With champagne. Actually, I think that was the most expensive part of the project. So I think what I wanted to say with this, other than I just think it's so cool, and I think it really shows that leaving people with the right kind of framing and a lot of room to make these innovations. It's also about making culture very tangible. So translate culture into very concrete actions, but also give it a language. And this is also giving stuff a language. Number, I think it's 42 actually. It's called Mr. X, Mr/Mrs. X. And that's the guy you can call in on your project that has nothing to do with your project, just to see if he has something to share. And yesterday I heard one of my colleagues, Jakob, says, "Oh man, can I be Mr. X in that project?" And that's creating a language and an action within your culture. 43 is my personal favorite. It's fire walk with me. So if you're burned out or you feel a little bit distressed or maybe you don't know what to do with your next project, bring in a colleague and go for a walk. Just go for a walk. And that normally works as well. I don't know if you do so. Another way of enabling a new way of culture, at least within these very huge organizations, is spreading the word. But let other people spread the word. Don't do a poster with two hands with mold in it and leaves coming out. I hate that poster. So don't do a poster. This is, I love the wording, viral change. So spread the change virally. And the way that we actually there's something we just announced as well, is something that we call lab rats, Mindlab rats. And these are the peers that we work with that has a eager or a curiosity or a flair for experimentations that work within our partner organizations. So they're not a part of Mindlab. We just know them because we work with them. And then we build this network of lab rats, and we nourish them to make sure that they always are capable of doing what they want to do, of something that looks like innovation. So you can always call a guy from Mindlab and get help with your project. If you're a lab rat, you can call anyways, but lab rats, we always take the phone, right? This way, we scale the way that we work through peers. So it's not a poster. It's really about working with the people within the organizations. I mentioned that we're not training the trainers, and I think with this, it's more like facilitating the facilitators. So that's really a way to scale. Rather than, because we're 20 people in Mindlab, and I think when you count them all together, I think we have like 20,000 colleagues. That's a whole lot. And it's pretty difficult to scale and disseminate innovation culture. 20 people within an organization of 20,000 people. But we can handle maybe hundreds of these lab rats, and then we have the scale to do what we think is the right way of working within the public organizations. And time is running out. I just have one slide left. I think the most important part of disseminate culture is be a cultural leader yourself. So if you want a change to be made, you can't talk about it. You have to do it. And this is actually me coming on my way to work. And I do this every time it's not raining. And actually one of my employees said yesterday, you almost ran over one of my friends. I said, no way, no way. It was a guy on a skateboard in a suit. It was you for sure. Okay, it's me, probably. But the thing is, if you want an explorative culture, you need to be explorative yourself. if you want a risk-taking culture, you need to be a risk-taker yourself. If you want a culture that are playful, you have to be playful yourself. So be the cultural leader yourself, rather than just talk about it or do the poster thing I said just before. And I think that's actually it. Yep, questions or anything? Is this on? Yeah. In Dutch or English?
English. Yes,
Is that it? You talked a lot about the importance of experiment. I wonder, it kind of doesn't fit with public organizations.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about an experience you had with an experiment within a public organization, and if you if there were some limits to the experiment or not, or just give an example? Or
there will probably be limits, but I think that to me it has to do with that you are actually ready to show something to the public before it's implemented. So it's not that you have to do like a real life experiment. You can just show it to 50 people or so. We're doing some work on sharing economy, for instance. Are you all familiar with sharing economy? Yeah, so to speak. All right. The way that we think of it is it's the approach that we have is it's a business of growth. So it's not about regulations. It has to, the work that we do has to be how do we make it grow in terms of business and value creation altogether. So what we did is that we did a heck of a lot of research, and then we tried to share what we call possible futures. And it has nothing to do with new businesses. It's just that if regulations were lowered to these kinds of formats, how would that look to you? So when we talk about experiments, it's not that we change the tax system on Fyn, which is a big island in Denmark. It's more like that we do small experiments. So we actually make what we are working with very concrete, and then we share it with someone. For instance, the Ministry of Business and Growth is a ministry making very little regulation and not that many laws, but they're kind of trying to affect every one of the other ministries because they're making laws or regulations that has implications on businesses. So instead of just having that very alpha male kind of discussion, we try to facilitate like possible futures. So experimentation is not crazy stuff. It's just giving it a form that you can actually talk about, and then you can share it within the organization or without the outside the organization. And actually, in that regard, because we find it very difficult to actually be able to do so within the organization, I came up with a notion or a project that we call the public startup. So we actually wanted to build a startup within the business, the Ministry of Business and Growth, working on regulations. So we wanted to prove that if you put the right people in a room, and then you work with the framing and also the making room for them to flourish within that frame that you've given them, that we could do policy making within 14 days. And that was quite ambitious. And then luckily an election came and tackled the project. And since there was an election, we couldn't do politics. But we're actually planning on starting it again, and then I'll be able to share with you how that worked. But within that space, you can do all kinds of experimentation because it's like confined to that space. And I think that's really one of the things that we have to work with as public sectors organizations, is how do we make these, how do we create room for innovation and experimentation as well. And I think just one final thing and then another question. The reason why I emphasize the experiment that much is because I think it's like the next level thing for public organizations. Because we kind of get the citizen-driven innovation that we have to, ask the citizens or do research and stuff like that. We kind of get it. It's not that we have implemented fully and successfully altogether, but we know it's something that we have to do. But in a world that is so fast changing that the world is today, you have to be on the forefront on everything, and that's impossible. So rather than being forefront, you have to have a way of being very agile once you actually see a problem. And experimentation is one way of doing that. More questions? No? All right. Thank you, it is then.